This week, Shailesh Athalye, Senior Vice President of Product Management at Qualys, joins us to discuss why cybersecurity is an unfair game. Then, in the security news, we jump right in. Stop hiding your secrets in plain sight, detecting wildcard DNS abuse, $5 setup that hacks biometric fingerprints, managing passwords with pen and paper, Windows 10 0 days, and why The Matrix might be the best hacker movie. Finally, we close out the show with a special pre-recorded interview, tech segment rather, with Sven Morgenroth, a security researcher at NetSparker, where we discuss authentication and authorization vulnerabilities. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
Keeping up with security issues across thousands of web assets without the right approach to web application security is a daunting task. Get ahead with web vulnerability scanning automation from NetSparker, a leader in dynamic and interactive application security testing known for its ease of use and accurate results. Detect a wide range of vulnerabilities in all legacy and modern web applications, address security bugs at scale by automating the confirmation process, automatically prioritize vulnerabilities, and assign actionable tickets to the right developers in their native workflows for rapid remediation. For more information on how to scale application security with ease, visit securityweekly.com/NetSparker.
Welcome back to Winnipeg Public Access Television. I'm the Reverend Doug, and this is the Church of Programming. Tonight we'll be talking about Paquette, Chapter 8, Verse 5. Sister Edna will be performing Gotterdammerung Hell Rain on the Mighty Wurlitzer, and the Reverend Paul will be talking about his devotional study, How to Make Your Data Division Sexy as Hell. Reverend Paul, take it away.
Welcome everyone to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 720, recorded on December 1st, 2021, right here in the Church of G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. To my left is Dr. Doug White with some light reading for everyone.
Just for fun. It's Paquette structured programming.
Structured COBOL.
COBOL.
Is that like opposed to unstructured COBOL?
I think all COBOL was unstructured in some ways. But
or it was all structured. I don't know that.
No, they had object COBOL. Oh yeah. You want to go there? That's the place to go.
I
right
never
there.
want to go.
I mean,
there.
there's people still in asylums from that. I mean, just the fact that the book came out, people are running for the exits.
Hence the popularity of the structured COBOL book.
That's right. The classic Paquette structured programming in COBOL.
The funny part is it's probably still completely 100% relevant.
I guarantee you could write this code and it would run on punch cards if you had a reader.
It's
good old
amazing,
COBOL.
actually.
Never changes.
On the lines remotely, Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us.
Hello, hello, hello.
What's going on, Jeff? Nice to have you on the show this evening. Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us.
Wow, Jeff, and he didn't have any reminiscing about COBOL or Pascal or any of the things going.
We had our own operating system at NSA. Most people don't know that.
Oh.
We can't talk about it.
Was it called
and our
NSA?
own programming language.
Can you tell us
we
about
can
it,
talk
Jeff?
about it.
You can? It's not classified? Usually your answer to that is classified.
It's not classified anymore, no.
Or if you just don't feel like
it's
talking
just-
about something, you're just like, it's classified.
It's just completely redacted.
Yeah. Where is Mr.
And
Josh
folklore.
Marpet? Is Josh Marpet here with us?
You asked
right here.
I was trying to tell you.
I can't see
There
him.
he is. He's down there in the corner.
No, I can't see him on my screens. Hey, Josh. Nice to
Hi.
have you.
So, Dr. Doug, that book has an incredibly useful use in its sort of afterlife now. If you carry that around, everybody knows you're a power bottom.
That's why I keep it with me at all times. I have it in my car, just in case I get pulled over by the police. I found
They feel bad for you and they
I
let
tell
you
them,
go.
look, could we just talk about, could you take 5 minutes for me to explain some pieces of COBOL to you? And yeah, it also works on Jehovah's Witnesses.
I was going to say, he used to carry around Jehovah's Witnesses magazines, but he found the COBOL book was much, much more powerful.
I literally said that to them once. They came up to my house. I was out in the yard, and the guy came up and he was like, "Will we take 5 minutes to talk to you about this?" And I was like, "If you'll let me take 5 minutes to talk to you about C programming." And he said, "Okay, deal." So I was like, "Oh wait, I don't have anything prepared."
Oh, God. That's hilarious. Let's see. On to announcements. In an overabundance of caution, we have decided to flip this year's Security Weekly Unlocked to a virtual format. Safety of our listeners and host is our number one priority. We will miss seeing all of you in person, but hope you can join us at Security Weekly Unlocked Virtual. The event will now take place Thursday, December 16th from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. You can still register for free at securityweekly.com/unlocked, and we hope to be live and in person next year in 2022. Stay tuned for more about next year's Unlocked conference. With that, this segment is sponsored by Qualys. You can visit securityweekly.com/Qualys. Joining us for this segment, Shailesh Athalye is the Senior Vice President of Product Management at Qualys. Shailesh holds a master's degree in computer applications and joins us today to discuss what attackers did differently in 2021, why they're exceeding more often, and what lies ahead. Shailesh, welcome to Paul Security Weekly.
Hey, thanks, guys. It's a pleasure to be on this show, and would love to get the copy of that book just to put that as our virtual background, maybe.
Right? The covers are like really. I said that to Doug Shailesh that the computer books from back in the day all had like a similar kind of look and feel and color scheme and palette and stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you put that next to the coffee cups from the 1990s, you've got about roughly the same thing.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
But if you want to be a full power nerd, you have to have your name stamped on the end of it. And there you go. It's like that's the only way to achieve that kind of greatness.
Shailesh, how did you get your start in information security?
That's interesting. So unfortunately, that was my first job, because when I had applied for a job just as a developer, they said like not a good enough C++ developer. But hey, what you could do is you could review the code for security. So that's how my work in IT or security started 20 years back. Then I moved to the spam control. Somehow I was given a job of finding out false positive in spam control. It took quite a lot of weekends out of that.
That's awesome.
I can still make him cringe. Bayesian filtering.
And so, how long have you been at Qualys? How did you come to work at Qualys?
So my journey at Qualys started 10 years back, I would say. Qualys, was known as the leader in vulnerability management space then and now. But the idea was that we could expand the platform to start configuration and compliance line of products that time. So they brought me in as a part of that, to build the compliance line of products. Mm-hmm. That's how my journey in Qualys started, 10 years back.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's still looking at a lot of code like you got your start in.
Some things here and there. Part of that, we build interesting, cool stuff on our way. Yeah.
And now in your role, and just knowing you for the short time I do get that you spend a lot of time with customers, which I feel is very important, right? I feel like it's a great thing for Qualys and Qualys' customers to have product management spending time with customers. That's important. What are you hearing from your customers, Shailesh, that is like their number one problem? Like as you went through this year, probably virtually, meeting with all your customers, right? Can you pick out themes of what their challenges are today?
So I can start off and summarize, right? Like over a period of time when we are talking to customers, there's this part of. Hey guys, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Properly still?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So there's this part of what customers been thinking. Is that something what we are doing wrong? That though we are continuously adding security tools, we are working all our weekdays and weekends and at least like 12 hours a day, and we are still getting breached or attacked. Is that something what we are doing wrong, right? Like, or is that something what we need to do, what we are not doing? So the first part is they just wanted to understand, like, hey, is what is it that we can do to improve? And then the second part is when we step back, and we think about it as a security team, where we are putting in our time, right? Like out of these 12 hours, all days we are working out of the week. And the amount of time we realize we are putting in is in like, hey, how do we find out all of our assets? How do we group them together? How can I feed them to my security tools? How can I fix the security scan jobs and security agents and then get that data and then feed it to my ticketing? And then once the ticket has a close, then how can I feed it back to my tools to get the closure on those issues? And guess what? Like, how many of those are security related things? Probably zero. So they were asking like, hey, how can we concentrate on the core security aspect? That means what do we need to really automate? So these two things, what we've been hearing from customers. And one of my answers to that was like, guys, it's not like you're doing something incorrect, right? Like if you, and I want to take the comparison. If you guys have seen Squid Game, any Squid Game fan over here?
I started
Little
watching
bit, yeah.
it, so yeah. So don't spoil it for me.
So it's the same story, right? Like where all the contestants come in and they have to play this unfair game. And same like that, we've been telling customers it's not necessarily you're doing wrong, but what you're doing is you're always playing an away match. You're always playing an unfair game because you have to play the game what attackers are starting, right? Like if they are doing the phishing campaign on you, you have to strengthen your user security. If they are going and attacking your open RDP, you have to harden your RDP. The second part of that is you have to continuously keep on showing the proof, right? Like to your other guys that you're doing a good job. Attackers don't have to do that. Like they don't have to show any proof that they're doing a good job or a particular machine they're hacking. One machine is good enough. But on the defender side, they have to secure all the machines, which is sort of unfair.
It's interesting that your customers are and I'm sure this is a common theme. Like, am I doing enough? And that's a slippery slope because sometimes they'll ask, "What can I do? This the bare minimum?" But you also don't want to overcommit on the wrong things. How do you guide your customers to educate them on like where they're focusing their resources? Is that the right place? And are they doing enough for security to mitigate enough of the bad things happening?
Yeah, really interesting, Paul. So one part of what we keep on hearing is the same what you mentioned. Like how do I make sure like I'm doing enough? And that enough part, many a times as a passionate security person, we, though however cliche it might sound, but we got to just go by the business, right? Like finally we are in this game because we want to secure the business, and that business prospect or the business context will tell us if we are doing is okay or good enough. If all of my apps, which are my business centric, business critical apps, and those are maybe just 10% of my critical assets, if I'm securing them, then it's good enough for me.
Does that take into accountability? Does that take into accountability any of the misconfigurations that are often abused? I mean, one of the key focuses you guys have is the vulnerability side of this and remediating those. But often we're seeing many of the attack vectors, or even once they're in, the movements that cause the biggest damage are the ones that are done through misconfigurations. Are there ways that we can start to look at and address those kind of fundamental problems with the misconfiguration side of this?
I mean, interesting point, Tyler. And to be honest, since a couple of years at least, we are seeing there's a lot of concentration on strengthening the hardenings of the system beyond just vulnerabilities, right? Because a lot of the times customers been looking at only the vulnerability management. They realize that, hey, many of these attacks are happening through open RDPs, right? Like, and then fixing some of the times the vulnerabilities and taking the downtime is probably not possible. So though I have then, let's say, remote vulnerability, RDP vulnerability, I can't really patch it. Then what do I do? And that's where a lot of customers are saying that they want to turn to reducing the risk still. And that means I want to harden my system. I want to make sure that though I cannot patch the RDP vulnerability, I want to harden it so that only the right users have access to it. And same on the other misconfigurations, right? Like misconfiguration could be like, hey, I don't want to use maybe a password which is 12345, right? Like, or I want to make sure like whatever is my sensitive data, at least the permission on those is secure or hardened. So we are definitely seeing that the customers are moving or giving the equal importance to security hardening as much as they are giving importance to vulnerability management, especially since 1.5 years.
Does the security hardening negatively impact the severity of vulnerabilities found? That's kind of where I hear your customers kind of getting at, that I got so many vulnerabilities, and yeah, they're ranked in criticality, but if I harden my systems, I can kind of mitigate some of the, number-based risk that is these vulnerabilities are being scored on.
Oh, definitely. And that's where you're seeing not just the customers, but even the tools, right? Like which were traditional vulnerability risk management tools are trying to take that context of misconfigurations, right? Like if vulnerability cannot be fixed, how can I reduce the risk? And for that, what are the related controls I need to do? If you look at the CIS benchmarks or the CI, where CIS community is going is exactly the same. How can I cross-map the CIS controls to MITRE? How can I cross-map the CIS controls to vulnerabilities for reducing the risk?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't like to pick on organizations because they get their work cut out to mitigate vulnerabilities. However, when it comes to configuration, I think you make the attacker's job harder, right? And if you can't fix all the vulnerabilities, no one can fix every single vulnerability. And then the elephant in the room there is, what about a zero-day vulnerability and associated exploits with it? So we need to harden and make the attacker's job harder. And sometimes that may feel like you're not really having an impact. In other words, I'm fixing all of the open redirects and putting in a process to make sure there's no open redirects. And that may seem like a low-severity vulnerability and a low-severity misconfiguration. However, if it enables like a really successful phishing attack, that can be really bad. Now I've just made the attacker's job harder.
Oh, spot on. Definitely.
I mean, that's all you can really do, right? I mean, I one time as a police officer told me, he said, you can't stop people from stealing cars.
Right.
I don't care what you do, they're going to get stolen. If the car is valuable, somebody will figure out a way. So you have to make that car less attractive to the person that's stealing it, so they'll go on down the street and go after somebody else. I mean, that's really about where you are with security, because you're never going to completely harden anything. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. That's not true. That's not true, Doug. Come on, man. Jeez, it's so easy to harden something totally and completely and make it 100% secure.
Yeah.
What did we say? I think we worked it out together. You turn it off, you put it through a shredder, you drop it down a mine shaft, and you pour about 10 tons of concrete on it. It's fine.
Then this is what you need.
But it balances that usability and also operational functionality take precedence. To your example, Josh, yes, I could do that, but then I really can't use my car.
Right,
and I can't patch all of my systems because it could break other things and disrupt operations. So much of it, I think, Shailesh, what you do with your customers, right, is balancing that security risk with the operational risk.
Absolutely. And one of the, that's really interesting point. And one of the parts which is becoming important is all the objectives, what we have on the security side is to reduce the security risk, right? But the ops people, they're saying that, hey, I need to make sure, like, if my executive wants to drive the car, that car is drivable, right? And all the machines which you're asking me to patch or harden, if that has my important database running, or if that is my executive laptop, I cannot have that going down, right? Simple as that.
Yep.
So the part which is becoming interesting is how do we provide some sort of collaboration indicator, right? Like, could we tell that, hey, this vulnerability is bad, but the patch what you are having against it has good reliability score. And that will probably make some friends in IT team, that has some indicators that a lot of our customers have told. Since the time I've provided them the patch reliability score, they started to ask me out for beer. They're starting to take me out for drinks. As a security team, that's a big thing.
Yeah, usually it's the other way around. We're trying to take out the ops people for drinks, so they apply some security to their systems, right?
How far out are we from getting a more automated and reliable vulnerability management system so that we can reduce the resources that are necessary to manage vulnerabilities? We're running into the problem where vulnerabilities need to be patched very quickly. That does need to be done automatically, and we need to stop putting all of the reliance on or resources into the people side of this so that they can focus on the misconfigurations, the hardening, all the things that get put to the back burner because there's some CVE out there. Hackers aren't using CVEs. They may abuse them once in a while, but we're abusing the misconfigurations and leveraging those, which are things that get put to the back burner because there's not enough resources or budget. So the automation of the vulnerability management side of this, I think, is obviously the golden ticket. But how far off are we from that?
I made really interesting point, Tyler, and we are seeing that a lot of companies are open to leveraging. We hear quite a lot, right? Like SOAR capability, right? Like the workflow engine capability. They're all leveraging these capabilities on the EDR side. We are doing automation on those fronts. And that's something a lot of customers are asking, like, hey, how can we automate or make workflows created for identifying assets, identifying vulnerabilities, creating tickets, patching them, and closing them? If my SOAR can take some sort of intelligent decision, if this is a malicious event, and let me just fire some sort of a rule in firewall and close the connection, why can't that workflow be leveraged for the vulnerability management? I think it is time. We are hearing a number of customers asking this, especially for the cloud assets, because the number one reason where a lot of time of vulnerability and patching and configuration hardening for customer is going is finding out even those assets, right? Like if the workflow engine is leveraged there, then I think probably 75% of time they're saying, which will go towards actual security outcomes and their analysis instead of defining what to find and what to assess.
But I do think attackers pay attention to vulnerabilities, but I think the tricky part for defensive teams is how do I differentiate something that I gotta patch versus something I can mitigate and or detect later? That's the big decision. Can I overcome it with configuration and or detection and or prevention? Or like, is the easier path, I just need to go apply this patch and deal with whatever pain is associated with applying that patch? And how do I make that decision?
I think probably the answer is even a step before that, right? So it's maybe, let me just give an example. Like today, the security and the IT teams, how they're managing their asset is in some sort of spreadsheet in tabular form of rows and columns, right? And attackers are not managing their asset discovery using some tables and rows and columns. What they're doing is finding out like, hey, what is this company.com? Let me find out what are all the organizations and subsidiaries of this. Let me find out from DNS registrar or doing who is all the machines, all their other domains, and then let me fingerprint them and get that context, right, of what is the vulnerability on these discovered asset. Unfortunately, on the defender side, that's not what we are doing, right? Like our asset management for vulnerability management is still driven by the IT team's objective. It is still tabular. It is still without the context. So that's one part a lot of customers are trying to do is, hey, how do I find out my assets with context? Exactly the same manner my attackers are finding out those assets. And then let me do some sort of fingerprinting and find out vulnerabilities. Those let me patch first. And the remaining ones, maybe I can, mitigate the risk by doing configuration hardening.
And Shailesh, I agree. And I think that for me, it's not about looking at maybe patching the systems where my sensitive data lives. It's about if I'm going to apply a patch, what paths lead to that? What paths lead to the attacker's goal of either encrypting my data, stealing my data, or disrupting operations? What paths lead to that? And then let's start patching along that pathway. And there's multiple, and we've talked about it on the show a lot in the past, right? There's multiple factors that go into in kind of metadata points about a particular vulnerability. Is the software in use on how many systems? How used is the software? How exposed is the software and accessible is it to an attacker? Those kind of things I think are really super important in determining the priority that would trigger, okay, we need to patch this now versus 30 days versus 60 days versus 90 or maybe never.
Fantastic point. In fact, I can tell you exact example. One of the customer leverage is what is the most vulnerable software in my environment. I don't want to take maybe one software name, but let's say Firefox, right? Like they mentioned. Now, they first wanted to check like, hey, how many of my assets or my users are even using Firefox? They realize that it's less than 10%. Then at first place, why am I just even doing vulnerability assessment and like patching them, right? Let me just remove them, right? And let's just reduce that attack surface. No longer Firefox. No need to even check the vulnerabilities or patching them. Like how I can reduce the work, what I don't really need to even do. And then maybe let me check like, hey, Exchange vulnerabilities, really bad, maybe proxy logon vulnerability. Let me now first patch them, because that's an authorized software I can't remove, I need to use, and that's going to have an impact on my users.
But that also relies on good configuration management so that end users are not able to do those side loads or installing software that the IT department, is not validating or checking or updating, which in many orgs is still a major problem that is hard to combat. And so really getting that configuration and lockdown, not having special snowflake users that have, different privileges that are that 10% that are installing those things. And then also looking at the outside world of your SaaS applications that are now, everywhere on just about every platform, which you may or may not have a lot of control in. So there's a lot more moving parts, I think, than originally in the vulnerability management and kind of configuration space that we have to think about.
No doubt about it. In fact, and just to iterate and give probably some sort of meat to what you mentioned. In fact, CISA does mention, right, like the number one control for them to prevent the ransomware risk they talk about is keep a tab of machines which are not even running antivirus tools, or if they're running unauthorized software, right? So a lot of stress is now given on, I need to make sure that my host, my assets are only running what is needed to run and is running, in fact, some sort of an endpoint or antivirus tool, right? The same AV tool or the same endpoint security tool is not going to tell me if it is running or not on what machines. So how can I keep a tab of that through my asset management solution? That's becoming, in fact, one of their priorities.
Yeah, Shailesh, you got me thinking, like, I really like the reduce attack surface thing, because I think we have so many platforms and applications because maybe two things. One, they're easy to acquire and spin up and easier than ever before. And people just get this emotional attachment to a platform or application. Like, oh, I have Firefox. Like, let's leave security researchers and hackers out of it, right? Because we run every single browser because reasons. But if you're not in that camp, like, oh, I use Firefox for like this one thing, or I use this application for this one thing, and I've always used it for this one thing, and I can't let go. And I'm like, really? Because I bet you can. Because you can let go of that stuff. I think people are too emotionally attached to software and platforms that hinders our ability to reduce the attack surface, that I think is easier than configuring it properly, managing it properly, and patching it properly.
Can I throw something in here for just a second?
Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
Shailesh, I want to back up a step. We've been talking about vulnerabilities and patching and things like that, but something you mentioned earlier has been sort of rolling around my head. You mentioned keeping track of assets. And I think the problem is that the word asset is very much changed from what it used to be. assets used to be, I have a computer, I have a server, I have a networking device, I've got some sort of microprocessor, whatever, factory floor, IoT, ICS, SCADA. What's an asset today with containers and virtual machines and Lambda functions and...
Yeah, I mean, so can I crack a dad joke? Is that the right time?
Yes, please do. Dad jokes
are always the right time. Go for it, brother.
So what's the problem with cloud? They always drift, right? Like so, and that's actually is one of the reasons. Yeah, and that's really becoming true in the way we are managing assets today for the asset management team, because the cloud assets are either drifting or they are going up and down, and they have no idea about like what are my assets really are and which are not drifted. So that's one of the key challenge which could be solved by using some sort of a mechanism which will always group, identify, discover these assets, and not from the IT inventory perspective, right? Like for a lot of years, the security team's been relying on the IT-centric inventory modules, which talk about like, hey, what is my usage pattern? Can I reduce my cloud cost? Do you need this service? Can I use instead of this other service? What security teams need is, hey, out of all these cloud assets or hybrid assets, what I have, what's really my security context for that? Are they exposed to internet, right? Like, are they running important database? Are they even not running or running the antivirus tool? If they're running or not running unauthorized or authorized software. So that's where I think a lot of stress is from customers, is finding out the assets for their security context perspective, especially in cloud.
Shailesh,
okay, but you've
okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
But you've still got assets like, and your points are very well said, and your joke was awesome and very on point. I loved it. Thank you. That was awesome. But I'm stealing that, by the way. Totally stealing that. Mm-hmm. But you've got assets, and I know I'm sticking on this, but it's kind of important to me. I'm actually dealing with it right now in another context. We're talking about assets being applications, APIs, not just, again, the hard assets of a machine, even the sort of hard assets of a virtual machine. You can still identify it. It's got an IP address. But things like applications and programs and partner data lakes and everything else, it's not bloody easy. And a SOAR, by the way, every SOAR system that I've looked at can't do squat about finding those things in terms of doing an asset inventory, asset discovery stuff. It's a nightmare. So I'm curious. I know that Qualys has put together. Last time I talked to one of your people, it was like 47 new modules, or some ridiculous number. And I wonder if they're doing asset discovery on these types of assets.
And that it really on the spot, right? Because and those, you talked about it before, like whether it's Lambda, whether it's S3 buckets, whether it's my other resources, right? Like RDSs. And today, the only solution available for customer is like, hey, let me get just cloud resources related inventory tool. And then let me get another tool for managing or discovering or inventorying my hard assets, like you mentioned. And that's one of the things what we are trying to solve is how customers could get to use multiple sensors and bring in that telemetry of asset together on a single platform. And it's just not about showing consolidated dashboards and reports of like, hey, you have these virtual machines and these cloud assets and these S3 buckets and these IAM roles and these certificates, but actually providing them the context, right? Like that, hey, these are your 100 virtual machine, that's great. But out of those, 10 have vulnerabilities and they can connect to your S3 buckets, and these are not configured correctly, or the IAM roles are not configured correctly. And that's why these vulnerabilities can actually exploit your sensitive data in S3 bucket. So that's the type of context what we are trying to derive, what customers are asking, which is going just beyond the siloed inventory listings.
So I want to parlay on that slightly or leverage that because it's fascinating. When you talk cryptography, for example, normally the algorithms, as long as you're using a normal algorithm, AS256 or whatever, they're fine. But it's the implementation of them that suck. Okay. And so what I say is, if you've got a very hardened machine, great, wonderful. But once it interfaces with the S3 bucket, if the connection is not properly configured and all the settings are done absolutely correctly, it may be that you can test the machine, you can test the bucket, great, wonderful. But when they make the connection, that's when it has a problem. And so that sort of holistic view of vulnerabilities is what's absolutely necessary.
It's interesting, Josh, just segueing off your point, like we talk about threats and vulnerabilities and risk, and some people use the word exposure. I think what we're really talking about are like the conditions that lead to a security event. And I think really where vulnerability management might be mislabeled is where it's evolved to, in that it helps me find those conditions, whether that's on my systems, whether that's on my network, whether that's in the cloud, whether that's a DNS configuration, because like where does that fit? Because it typically doesn't live on my network anymore, right? These are all conditions, and it might be series of conditions that leads to a security event that I need to mitigate.
Yes.
Jeff, am I using that?
I agree and I disagree with you, Paul. I think the problem is we use all these terms, and depending on who you talk to, they're using a different term, thinking in their head that they mean the same thing or that they're synonymous. Everything that you've just described, I think the classic dictionary, NSA glossary definition is a vulnerability.
Sure.
Vulnerability is simply a weakness. I mean, we've been on, I've been arguing with Josh a little bit on the Discord and others about, defining terminology like risk and what is and what isn't a risk. And it stemmed from, I think it was you, Paul, used the term security risk. I don't think there is such a thing as a security risk. But, to get at the, why I think that has to do with defining our terminology. Vulnerabilities can be the practices or bad habits of users. It can be configurations. It can be misconfigurations. It could be the applications being used. It could be the platforms, the hardware, the software, as well as all the stuff that we usually think of in terms of vulnerabilities that the scanners find. They're all vulnerabilities. They're all weaknesses, or as you say, conditions that could lead to compromise. Then what are risks then? What are threats then? What are all the other terms that get
I think
thrown
that
out
takes
there
us different places. About. But what I hear you saying, Jeff, and I'll agree with you, right? We can use the term vulnerability, and that doesn't mean something that you can necessarily patch, right? Vulnerability is a weakness. And I think weakness is more of what we're talking about. Shailesh, that's where I see Qualys going, right, in their various offerings, is allowing your customers to find and prioritize those weaknesses.
Oh, no doubt about it. In fact, you'll see in average organization, the number of vulnerabilities, even if you consider the CV-based vulnerabilities, are the ones which could be exploited. Maybe only 70% could have even a patch to actually patch them. But then what about the remaining 30, right? For which you need to make some registry tweaks. You need to make some sort of changes in some config files, etc. So definitely where platform we are trying to take is the overall remediation, and patch management is a part of it. And that remediation would under the hood take care of either remediating the misconfigs, uninstalling the software which you don't really need to use, which you are terming as unauthorized, as well as actually fixing the misconfiguration and actually applying the right patches.
Can we call a spade a minute? Not to pick on Qualys, but I don't think any whatever you guys call yourselves this week, vulnerability management, what we used to call vulnerability scanning engine, nobody is going to run the best products in the world and fix all the problems that are discovered consistently and over the entire enterprise and be done. I think what you guys, and I like what you guys are doing, but I think what you guys are trying to do is really try to, steer the Titanic in a different direction. And I think the challenge is getting everybody in our industry to start thinking differently about what security is fundamentally, and what needs to be done. Because to me, what security is what you do after you've exhausted all of your patch management, your vulnerability scanning, vulnerability management, configuration management. After you've done everything else, then what do you do? Because there's all sorts of conditions that prevent lots of different things from happening, plus all the new stuff that's coming out all the time, plus the possibility of 0-day. Security is what's left afterward. And that's where you're left with, okay, here's the cards we're dealt with. Here's our enterprise. It is what it is. We have the systems. We have the applications that, like Firefox, and I am a Firefox user. For whatever reason, people are using applications. You're only reducing your attack surface so much. At some point, you're left with, okay, this is what we got, and security then is how do you deal with what you've got left. and it's not another iteration of all the things we're talking about. I don't believe it's something to do with monitoring and detection and responding to events and logs and looking for the unusual, looking for the anomalous events, and it's very imprecise, and it's very something just doesn't look right, something just doesn't feel like, and very few people and organizations, and by the way, I think that's necessarily a human activity. Maybe AI will get there, but someday. But to me, at the end of the day, that's what security is. I'm not saying that all this stuff isn't important, but I think all this stuff is what we've been doing for the last 25, 30 years. And I would like to think that we've all figured out that we can't just do this and think we're done. This, to me, this is the limitation of automation, the limitation of the tools and the technology anyway. So just getting companies to rethink, just how they're using the tools that you have, I think is a good start.
I love what you actually mentioned, and that's something, in fact, customers are asking, and there's a reason for that, right? And the tiredness in SOC or overworking in SOC is a reality, and that's why one of the reasons why we are seeing the skill shortage, as well as a lot of people leaving the SOC, is for the things you mentioned, right? And now if you try to compare with what autopilot is used in airplanes, can we not have actual basic security things put on autopilot so that, like pilot, once the plane is in autopilot, he's looking at like the weather patterns, right? Like if I can optimize my paths, if I can actually, optimize my fuel levels, etc. Doing the same if the basic security things like finding the asset with context and vulnerability patching, if it is put on autonomous mode, then the lot of security teams will be able to put their attention on the real security challenges and making decisions based on this data.
Another question in that realm is, do you think we need to start working on that point of customer contact and scoping up the people that are interacting with the customers? Because I got asked this the other day, and the questions are getting more, delineated. It's not just, oh, my tech doesn't work, or, oh, I have this problem, but you're starting to see these kind of questions about, well, what about this, and ransomware and vulnerabilities and all these different components mean that point of contact person is going to have a lot more knowledge, which starts to sound kind of really difficult to staff, because suddenly you need a really high-end person there to decide, where do I send this, this question even, because some people are going to be asking very sophisticated questions, and other people are going to be saying, I think I got ransomwared. Did I? And I mean, this is what they were asking me, because they were getting these kind of questions, and they were very there was a real range on those kind of questions, and it was like their people weren't really trained in security, and they said their questions were now going off of I can't access my PIN. It had started being like, I think my PIN was hacked, and they were having to try to delineate, was it actually hacked, or is it just, I mean, I get that question all the time from people. I think I was hacked, and then you start asking a question or two, and you go, yeah, you weren't hacked. This is just, somebody posing as you or whatever. But I was wondering, do we need to start pressing at that front end for the customer contact point to be a broader scope so that people can bring these security questions to the right place and get them to the right channel?
I think so too. And that's where I think there's a lot of opportunity to collaborate, right? Like one security tool doesn't have to only concentrate on one particular use case, right? Like a lot of the times, the IT tooling is collaborating well for the DevOps, right? Like, I mean, the DevOps is basically the automation taken to another level so that the IT and engineering is able to deliver faster. I think it is time that we also have collaborative security tooling for the security teams. With the right question is asked, the base questions are automated and answered through a bot, and only the advanced ones require some sort of analysis and some sort of an advanced decision making.
That goes back to what we've been saying for a while, though. We are going to have the diversity, and this gap is going to continue to be a larger precipice of the much more mature companies that are doing all of these advanced security things and aspects, and having these elaborate programs, and having a secure CDIC pipeline. And then you're going to have the people that wonder, is there ransomware in here because I can't access my files? Yeah. That gap is getting to be much more, and so it becomes very hard to speak to that, and we end up with not only that gap, but we end up with a people problem. And I think the people problem is where the most impact comes from, when we can start to change culture, get companies all aligned in the same umbrella, start to have those security conversations, and start to move that needle so that even if they're not mature, the people are getting a mindset around security, which then starts to drive the maturity, which then starts to drive the leadership and the product and the community and the customer interactions. So I think there's a scale there that you have to cross in order for this to start to get to a point where it matters, right?
100% I agree. I mean, no doubt about it. I mean, it is time where, you take the noise out, like you mentioned, concentrate on the fundamentals and concentrate on the automation of those fundamentals so that the teams actually look at the strategies and make the decisions based on that.
Yeah, I think it's more about an augmented reality rather than like a fully automated AI, world kind of thing, right? Humans need to be involved right now, probably for the foreseeable future, in our lifetimes, probably our kids' lifetimes too.
War games.
Right?
The Whopper. I had another thought. Now I lost it because I went down the War Games trail.
Were you doing the general voice, Jeff? Hell, I don't know. I'd piss on a spark plug if it'd help.
You realize that we don't have enough hacker movies. I mean, when you can quote a movie from 1984 at a drop of a hat, we don't have enough hacker movies. Okay?
or I don't have a life. I mean, it could be that.
I remember what I was going to say, and I'm losing it again.
You want to Winnebago?
Stop it! Too much bourbon, too early.
With a blind man driving it.
I was simply going to add that. I lost
spandex. It's a privilege, not a right.
Some people have roomnesia.
Okay, it's back again. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. It's back. No, it's not. Oh, I remembered it. It's why I simply don't like to call any of the technology that's out there solutions. I prefer to call them tools, because it implies that they're being wielded by someone, that there is a person involved. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, interesting thought. I'm gonna steal that sometime.
Well, I mean, I think AI can get there. I mean, I do think that you can get to some point where it's useful, but I do think that right now we're not there. I mean, maybe someday, but not right now.
I mean, to be useful, it has to be
when it
under
gets
our
useful,
control, and
we're gonna
close the pod bay doors when I tell it to close the pod bay doors.
Right.
Is what I'm saying.
That's useful.
Right.
That's not really probably AI, but
True.
you don't want Hal making those decisions.
No.
Hey, since we're drifting, I want to completely change topics real quick.
Damn it.
Shailesh, in your background, it seems that you were involved with compliance solutions. So we have to have a PCI moment.
That's it for you then.
Were you involved back in the day in your guys', I think you just called it the PCI portal. I don't know what the official name was.
Well, my boss developed that from scratch. So Sumit Takar, who's the CEO now, so that was his first project. So obviously that's his baby.
Wait. So somebody that was working on a PCI project is now the CEO? Is that what you said? Your whole company?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
PCI success story.
I would say Sumit did a great job, though. I mean, the feedback that I got, having worked for a competitor at the time, was the Qualys PCI console was really good, actually.
Well, let's just say we set the bar pretty low, Paul.
That's true. At the company we worked for, yes.
So my PCI question, though, is your customer facing, and yes, Qualys was light years ahead of its competitors in not necessarily the product and the solution, but simply understanding the customer needs from a compliance perspective, and in particular PCI. And hopefully that continues on today. I could argue philosophically about whether, and I used to argue with, like a vulnerability scan. Do you need to scan all 65,000 potential ports or not? Qualys was right up front about, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to scan the common ports and the ones that most commonly associated, the top however many hundred. Whereas, others say, well, no, it says to do an exhaustive scan, you got to do all 65,000. That's a philosophical argument, I guess. But how much is compliance in general still a role for what you guys are trying to develop? How many of your customers are coming to you? I would assume saying, okay, we've got the compliance down. Now what else? What else can we do? How else can we, get beyond, the bare minimum?
Yeah, great question. So one thing I think what customers are looking at doing and what Qualys provides is, whatever good things you're doing on the security side, right? Like whether you're doing vulnerability management, like you mentioned, PCI assessment, whether you're doing, file integrity monitoring, or you're finding out that if you have sensitive data and you're securing it, etc. All of that, if all the right things I'm doing on the security side, how can I get out-of-box reflection of that, validation of that, as a compliance report, right? I don't want to, again, because, as a security team, you think like, okay, I have no idea what this compliance guy is talking about, or all these compliance mandates, 860 pages, I don't know what they're talking about. And then on the compliance side, the problem for compliance people is, hey, all of these security people are just dumping this data to me, right? Like, and then I have to use finally spreadsheets. Because if I put that in the traditional GRC tool, that data is going to get stale now that I'm using cloud assets, and that data is not going to talk with each other. And I can't do pivots in spreadsheet, then basically I've lost my job. So how can I actually get the data which I'm doing on the security side and out of box get the report of compliance through that? And that's something what we have launched a few days back called as a live compliance, which all of the things what we provide on Qualys security app side gets automatically mapped to compliance mandates like PCI, like FedRAMP, so NIST or HIPAA, and you get out-of-box report for that so that you're ready as internal auditor, and you can provide the same report when the external auditor shows up.
Cool.
No further questions, Jeff?
No,
Your Honor.
I one PCI question per segment is good enough for me.
Wow,
That was a rule.
Toned it down, huh? It's awesome.
Jeff's getting mellow.
I'm mellowing.
Mellowing out in your old age. Any other questions for Shailesh?
Shailesh, good stuff. I'm really eager to see all the different modules and asset discovery and stuff that we talked about. I think that it's, I have to admit, I think Qualys has grown up a lot in the last few years, and I'm eager to see some of the new things you're doing.
Oh, would love to. I mean, anytime, you have time, would love to give a demo or would talk more about the same.
Perfect.
But
Thank you.
you mentioned, been always a pleasure to be on the show.
Shailesh, I just have 5 questions for you. Are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
All right, let's do it.
3 words to describe yourself.
And a whiskey person as is considered as one of the words.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Cybersecurity.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
See you tomorrow.
What is your favorite hacker movie?
What's the one where the
Hackers.
no
Sneakers.
well, the hackers.
Jeff and I have this thing going on where my favorite movie is Hackers, his favorite movie is Sneakers, and so when we asked a guest, we kind of root for you're either on Team Hackers or Team Sneakers. So
what's your favorite movie, Shailesh? What was the movie you were asking about? Come on.
The one where CISO of some bank and they go after the family and stuff.
Firewall.
Firewall.
Is it Firewall?
Yeah, Firewall.
Yeah, it's
That's
Firewall.
with Harrison Ford, right?
Harrison Ford.
Harrison Ford. Yes. Very nice. Wow, we haven't.
That's a new one. Yeah, I don't think anybody. Yeah,
I think that was before CISO was a term, though, right?
That's great. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, he was really just security manager.
A screen scanner out of a fax machine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
gotta go back and watch that. Now that you say that, Shailesh, that's that needs to be on our list. I think we forgot about that one.
Yeah.
Well,
exactly. I think somebody said right away that because they didn't use the hard asset, they actually went through some network asset like fax machine, right?
Yeah, that's cool. Shailesh, choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Living, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Oh man, maybe I'll take a couple of people from Harry Potter, maybe. Some sort of magic life.
Magical people from Harry Potter. Very nice. That's awesome.
Cho Chang and Hagrid.
Yeah. Use your imagination.
Well, I don't want to use because they would be my parents.
Shailesh, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.
It's a pleasure to be on this Security Weekly, as it's always fun to have a conversation with you guys.
Thank you very much. Visit securityweekly.com/Qualys to learn more. Coming up next, the security news and why The Matrix might be the best hacker movie.